Okay, hi everyone. We're going to get started. So I am Nan Bischoff. I am the president of the Harvard Club of Long Island, and the Harvard Club of Long Island and the Bryant Library are so excited to welcome you tonight. We have an excellent program. And but before we begin the official formal portion of tonight's event, I have to go through some video conference etiquette rules. So everyone right now, please put yourself on mute. For the duration of tonight's event, you should be on mute unless you are speaking. I also have the ability to put you on mute. So if I see that you're not on mute, I will put you on mute. And so this is so that we make sure that the speakers are heard and do not get distracted. We're also going to ask that you save all of your questions. And well, actually, you should put your questions in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen in the toolbox. You'll see a symbol for chat. Type your questions in there over the course of the entire event. And toward the end of the evening, we will, our moderator will read questions from the chat box so that our authors can answer them. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. I will be your technical support, so I'm going to go into the background and I'm going to throw the event moderation over to Eileen Jacobson, who is also a member of the Harvard Club of Long Island.
Yes,
Eileen?
Thank you. Thanks, Nan. And thank you for being our tech support here too.
Of course.
I'm Eileen Jacobson, and I'm a past president of the Harvard Club of Long Island and the co-organizer of this distinguished authors event. My colleague Rhonda Berger and I are excited to offer this program to our members and to the many library patrons from Roslyn and Manhasset who signed up for this. This is the 9th book discussion that the Harvard Club has co-sponsored with the Bryant Library in Roslyn. Usually we've done it in person. We focus on authors with a Harvard connection, but this is the first time the book is also about Harvard, and in such an illuminating way. You'll hear soon from our honorees, Kent Garrett and Jeanne Ellsworth, who are the authors of The Last Negroes at Harvard, a brilliant title. And later, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions, as Nan mentioned, via the chat option at the bottom of your screen. First, though, we'll have a brief welcome from Victor Caputo, the Bryant Library director, who helped coordinate this wonderful event, along with the library's program director, Melissa Rubin. And then you'll hear from my colleague, Rhonda, who has done the lion's share of the work in getting this program together. And she will introduce the authors and bestow the actual prize. And now on to Victor. Where is Victor?
It's on mute.
I kept myself muted. I just want to say hi to everyone, and it's such an honor every year to do something with the Harvard Club. Rhonda has always been a great patron of Bryant Library, and through Rhonda, we were able to meet Gordon, who is now the board president for the Bryant Library. I also want to welcome a former board member, Karen Miller. Both have just been did and are doing amazing jobs at the library, just keeping us going. At a little history piece, I've been going through my emails today, and I found the original email that Rhonda sent to me through a G Berger email account that kind of offered this series up for and asked us to help with, and we were really truly honored, because at Bryant Library we love sharing things with the community. And I want to thank Jeanne and Kent for doing this tonight. It's an amazing topic, just a great written book, and I wish you much success with it. And and I just hope it continues to do well. I want to, for those of you that I have not seen in the library for a while, we miss you. We can't wait to see you in person. And but thank you for the support you've always given to the Bryant Library, and you and your families continue to be safe. And again, thank you to the Harvard Club and for Rhonda for just keeping us in the loop with this. And like I said, Melissa has done an amazing job for Bryant Library organizing this, much better than I could have done as the programmer many years ago. So, but at this time, I want to welcome and introduce Rhonda Berger.
Thank you, Victor. Good evening. My name is Rhonda Berger, and I'm a past president and current member of the advisory board of the Harvard Club of Long Island. I want to thank Victor Caputo, the Bryant Library director, and Melissa Rubin, the Bryant Library program director, for helping us to coordinate this wonderful event. In past, before the COVID epidemic, we had this in person, and we had some food, we had the books for the authors to sign, so I apologize that we cannot offer those aspects of it tonight. I also want to thank Eileen Jacobson, who's also a Harvard Club of Long Island past president and a current member of our advisory board, who is also an accomplished writer and journalist in her own right, who helps me with this every year. Isela Fishsoul, who's one of our board members, who first brought this book to our attention, and I think she's on tonight, and thank you very much, because it's a fantastic book. Sunil Sani is our Vice President for Programming, and we want to thank him. And of course, our illustrious President, Nan Bischoff, who really understands Zoom so much better than I do, and is just an integral part of tonight's event for more than that reason, but that's also very helpful. Kent Garrett, who was born in the Fort Greene projects in Brooklyn, became a producer of the groundbreaking public TV program, The Black Journal, and went on to a long and illustrious career with CBS and NBC News. He's a winner of 2 Emmy Awards and a Peabody Award, and then later took up organic dairy farming in upstate New York, which maybe we'll hear about. Dr. Jeanne Ellsworth taught elementary school for 10 years and then earned a doctorate, and she became a teacher of educators at the State University of New York. Since 2007, they have been living in the Catskill Mountains, and maybe we'll hear some more about that. The Last Negroes at Harvard explores Kent Garrett's time at Harvard from 1959 through 1963. He interviews his fellow Black classmates from that time and looks at their relationship to the greater civil rights movement. The students were trying to balance the competing demands of participating in civil rights events with the usual Harvard pursuits of studying hard and holding down work-study jobs. He reminisces about a dinner that they had with Malcolm X at Eliot House, as well as taking organic chemistry, Chem 20. He outlines his involvement in their attempts to gain recognition for their newly formed African and Afro-American Association of Students. He follows up on his classmates' life stories and touches upon the history of Black students at Harvard. For those of you who have not read it, it's a fantastic book. It's really fascinating. And for their insightful book, exploring the experience of Blacks at Harvard in the 1960s, the Harvard Club of Long Island would like to present our Distinguished Authors Awards to Kent Garrett and Dr. Jeanne Ellsworth for their fascinating book, The Last Negroes at Harvard, the class of 1960, and the 18 young men who changed Harvard forever. I don't know if you can see the awards, but we will mail them so that they will actually see them. And I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. It means a lot to me, and I absolutely loved your book, and I'm looking forward to hearing you both speak now. So I don't know if anyone can applaud through their mute, but applause to you for this wonderful book.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we're on now.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for the award, and thanks for having us on. I'll tell you a little bit about my life and about the book and the process of writing it. Overall, it was I'd say about an 8 to 9 year project from start to finish. And starting back in 1959, there were 18 of us at Harvard admitted to the class of 1963. And we were from all parts of the country, north, south, east, west, and some of us were middle class and some of us were from the Negro, as we were called back then, aristocracy. And I was pretty much from the poor part of the class. I'd grown up in Fort Greene projects in Brooklyn. And the whole class was about 1,100 guys, men, young men. And we were 18, so the percentage is something like 1.59% of the class was really black. And we were obviously not the first to go to Harvard, but before that, they would admit about 2, 3, 4 a year, and your admission was based really on you had to have good grades and come from and whether you could pay. And most blacks who went there, Negroes who went there, did their 4 years and got out of Cambridge as soon as they could and went on with their lives. There was a time when there was no black faculty, no black studies, no black student groups, and we were 18, and it gave us, we had some numbers, and we were able to form not only an individual racial identity, but also a group identity. And we kind of became a force there since we stuck together. And we kind of really ended up changing Harvard, and Harvard changed us. I mean, we were able to form a first black student group at Harvard. And that is in many ways our legacy today. But we, in terms of my life, my parents were from South Carolina. They had come to New York at about 1941, something like that. And in the South, my sister, I have a sister who's about 4 years younger than I am, and we both went to college. She went to Boston University, and my parents kept us pretty close rein on us. And I would go to South Carolina in the summers, where my grandfather had a beef farm down there, and I would. Brooklyn at that time, Fort Greene was a pretty rough in terms of gangs, and in the South it was pretty rough in terms of Jim Crow and discrimination, segregation. And my folks kept us out of trouble in New York City, and my grandfolks kept us out of trouble in South Carolina. I went to boys' high school in Brooklyn, New York, and got pretty good grades. And then from there went on to Harvard, where I started out in pre-med. I was going to go to medical school, but then I guess I ran into the realities of Chem 20 and that sort of thing, and decided maybe that wasn't the thing to do. But I ended up doing it anyway, in the sense that I didn't know what to do after I got out of my last year. So I went to NYU for about a year and didn't particularly like it, and then got into advertising, and I was an account executive training program, but I ended up spending a lot of times on commercial TV sets, and started to really like that, and ended up going to another agency and becoming a television commercial producer. When I did that for about 4 or 5 years, and then I went on to a show called Black Journal. But what happens, so I learned film and writing and TV in advertising. The company I worked for was called Gray Advertising, and I was assigned to the, I think it was the Post Toasties account, as I recall. And as making those commercials, my job was I remember one shoot where we had to get these Post Toasties to pop out of a box and look good. And at that time there was no digital technology or anything. And after spending about 3 or 4 weeks trying to get these things to pop out of a box, I saw the light and decided that this was not for me. This was not very good for the mind. So I got out of that. And luckily, Black Journal was getting started, and it was the first network black show in the country for blacks. It was by, for, and about blacks. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then I went to CBS, where I worked with Dan Rather for 10 years. And then I went to NBC and worked with Brokaw for about 10 years. And by that time, this was about we're talking 1996, 97 now, and the whole TV news business was kind of changing, becoming very marketing oriented and very dependent on your Nielsen ratings and that sort of thing. It became less pure news. So a lot of office politics and stuff like that. And we were owned at that time, by General Electric, and which was not a good thing in the sense that you would deal with realities of being owned by this big company. So anyway, I got out, I left there and decided that I'd want to become a dairy farmer. And I think that came from my grandfather spending summers down in South Carolina. And it was very gratifying, and I did that for 10 years. And the nice thing is that the cows they sort of crap on you anyway, forgetting about how many Emmys you've won and all that stuff. They don't relate to that, which is a very grounding experience. And then so I'm doing that for about 10 years. And as you know, it's sort of a young man's game. And as you get older, the cows sort of know you're getting older. And as you get arthritis, they know you're getting arthritis. And they kind of play games with you and move you around and that sort of thing. So I got out of that. And the question was, what am I going to do now? And Harvard sends out this magazine, Harvard Magazine, I think it's every 2 months, to all domestic graduates of Harvard. And as you get older, the first thing you do when it's a great magazine. It has, articles about what Harvard alumni are doing and that sort of thing. But as you get older, you start to go right away to the obituary page to see which guys in your class died. And so I got mine one day and went to the page and saw that a friend of mine who had been a class ahead of us had died. And that got me to thinking about what had happened to the other 18 guys in my class. I had known 3 or 4 and decided I would sort of search for them and maybe do a video about them, since, I was back in the documentary business now. And that's where the Jeanster comes in.
That's where I came in. So Kent and I were both single at the time, newly single, deciding maybe that we didn't want to stay that way. And we took the big step. We went on internet dating. And, Kent emailed me, managed to work the word Harvard into his first email,
That's not
as
true.
one does.
That's not true.
As one does. And so we had a date, and on the first date, we were at dinner, and he told me about this idea of getting together with his classmates, or at least find out what they did. And I was intrigued. And as I often say, I left that first date not sure there would be a second date, but I was sure he had a great idea. And I was interested in working with it with him on it. And so we did have more dates, and we're still together. But at some point we said, okay, we got to do this. And he taught me how to set up lights and operate the microphones and everything. And so we decided, we're going to try to make this documentary. We Googled the classmates, and, because they went to Harvard, a lot of them had, big name careers and many accolades. So in the beginning, it was easy to find the guys. We started out, we got in his car and went around and found them and started talking to them. It took us, I think the last guy we actually located was, maybe 7 or 8 years after we started. There were a couple of last guys that were really hard to find. And we also learned fairly soon that 4 of the men had passed away by the time we began. So we were down, to a more manageable number. But we went out and we asked them just about everything about their lives and their experiences at Harvard and their families. And we went back and did, second interviews. For the men who had passed away, we interviewed, family members and friends. So, by the time a few years had gone by, we had a tremendous amount of video footage, and we had transcripts, like, piles of stuff. So the question became, what the heck, how do you write something about this? Actually, before that, it was how do you make a movie out of it? But the movie idea, we couldn't make it work. We didn't want to raise the money. It was just so, you get to these so-called golden years, we didn't want to bother trying to raise money. So we sat there for a while and thought, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with all this stuff? And we said, okay, let's try a book. And the big problem with that was, how do you take 18, life stories of men who are 70 or so at the time and write something about it? So because my area is history of education, I became sort of the historian on the project, and I often say I was the architect of the book. I figured out, after a very long time, how to structure something, that wasn't going to be 500 pages long and would make some sense. But we had so many good times. Almost all our visits to the guys, we drove. We drove out to California and back twice. We drove to Atlanta and just all over New York State and the East Coast and Chicago. And we actually had to fly twice because one gentleman was living in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, and one gentleman was living in Austria. But we had a lot of fun and a lot of surprises.
Well, yeah, I mean, as we say, the book started out as a video documentary. We ended up making a 23-minute documentary that we were going to use to raise money for the longer documentary, but decided on the book project. And as I say, I'd known about 3 or 4 of the guys, and it was a question of finding out who the others were. And we were actually calling it, I think for the video, the Black 17. We thought there were 17 blacks in the class. And the way we had determined many of them were black, Harvard puts out this Harvard Register and these little black and white photos at the time of each guy in the class. And based on that, I'd go through and look at a guy and say, yeah, he's black, he's black. Now I figured I had it all down that way. And then our class has a newsletter that comes out every 2 months or so, where people just put in information and jottings and all that. And we decided to put in a note saying that we were working on this project, and that if any of the class guys had stories or remembrances of the blacks in the class, let us know. And then we got this note back saying that, hey, there might be 20 guys in your class that were black. And naturally, that was shocking to me in the sense that we had based all this on 17 guys and that sort of thing. So the question became, how do I find out who these other 2 or 3, whatever blacks are? Went back to the black and white photos, couldn't figure out who it was. Found a couple of guys that sort of looked black when I looked back at them, and decided, being the intrepid reporter with all this experience from NBC and CBS and all that, I decided I have to call these guys up and just, after small talk, pop the question. So I found this one guy, for example, in San Francisco, turned out to be a doctor, called him up. We had a little small talk. And at the end, I said, by the way, are you black? And luckily, he didn't say he didn't know, or he didn't say, I'll have to think about it or get back to you. But he said no. And then finally, I found one guy who was black, and his name was Jerry Secundi, and he's in the book. And he's a guy you really couldn't tell if you looking at him, if he was black or not. And he, in his photo. And so I called him and apologized, and he did say he was black. And so we know now that there were 18. The other surprise in the book was that one of my classmates was a guy named Lowell Davidson, who became a really wonderful piano player, avant-garde jazz piano player, and with Ornette Coleman. And he was in the class, and it turned out that he made one album called the Lowell Davidson Trio, and it involved him, Lowell, a drummer, and a bass player. And it turned out that the drummer was a guy named Milford Graves, who I had gone to boys' high school with for every day for about a year. He and I would ride the bus together, and he was on this album. And so we were able to talk to him about Lowell Davidson. And that was one of the other surprises. And then the third surprise was that one of our classmates, it turned out, was gay, and we never knew about it. And he told us that in one of the interviews for the book, and that was a surprise. And there were other surprises, things that happened to us in Harvard. And why don't you tell about that? The studies.
Well, because I'm basically a historian, I couldn't wait to get to the Harvard archives. And so we spent many a long hour paging through and looking for different documents that might answer some of our questions. And one of the first things I did was do a search and just put in the word Negro, for the archive collections, and then look at the dates. And we found 2 student papers that had been done as studies, sociological studies of the 18. One of them was by a senior, I believe, at the time, and he called that The Rising Sons of Darkness, a study of the Negro freshmen at Harvard. The other was done by a friend of theirs, a white classmate, whose name was Ronnie Blau, and he called his Bright Shadows in the Yard. So we got hold of the papers. I mean, the text of the papers was there, and text of one of the papers was in the archives, and then we contacted Ron Blau, and he gave us the whole paper, plus his professor's comments on it. And reading those was probably the most cringe-inducing part of the whole project, to sort of read these white guys' analyses of their families and their race consciousness. And like several times I thought Kent was going to just blow his top over some of the questions and some of the analyses. But it was still, to me, it was just a gold mine of information, because it's one thing for us to go around asking, 68, 70-year-old men what they thought 50 years earlier. But what we had in these papers was what they said at the time about themselves, and there a lot of questions about how they felt about being Black and being Black at Harvard. So that was just wonderful. But the thing that made you tell what the thing that made you the most crazy.
Yeah, what happened is, again, Ronnie Blau was in our class.
He was a nice guy.
It was a nice guy, and he hung out with us a bit. And the idea was everybody has to do papers, so we had to do a paper. And my roommate at the time suggested that Ronnie do a paper about the, and I'll tell you later about it, but about the Black Negro social life at in Harvard, at Boston. And his idea was that he was going to hang out with us on the weekend at parties, and then he would interview us during the week and write it all up. And luckily, we were able to convince him that our social lives would lead to a really very short book, or maybe just a few pages, and it wasn't worth it. So he abandoned that idea. So he decided to do this Bright Shadows in the Yard. And at that time, we didn't really object to the title. We really didn't know he had to do a paper, so we went along with it. But one question he had, which when I read 50 years later, just really ticked me off, was, if you had a chance to be reborn, would you be reborn as a Negro or white? And when I saw that, I just hit the ceiling and realized, but when I went on and kept reading, I realized that everybody had said they would prefer to be Negro, and except one guy, Hobie Armstrong, who was from Kingston, a city up here in New York. He had the very practical, very IBM type, that's where he worked kind of guy. He said, well, you know, I think I'd like to try it for a year and just see what happens, you know. So that was I thought, a brilliant kind of answer to that question. But I mean, the thing is, we were, in terms of, we were really curiosities up there. I mean, there were people, guys that had never talked to Negro, as we would call then, in any kind of significant or serious conversation. Freddie Easter, one of the guys in the class, had a conversation with was in the dining hall one time, and a guy came up to him and said, you know, can I talk to you? I've never talked to a Negro before, and he wanted to know what's it like. And you know, Freddie talked to the guy. He said the guy had a pretty scientific, research-oriented approach to the thing, and he, you know, didn't ask questions as to, you know, do you tan and stuff like that. But I mean, it was a serious conversation. They became friends. The guy was a hockey player, and Freddie invited Freddie to some hockey games, and they became good friends. But that's how it was. I mean, it was always the question of two questions. What's it like to be a Negro? And the second question is kind of, what do you people want? And, you know, you get tired of that after a while, but that's what was going on. But we did, you know, set up, we had the black table, the way Harvard set up, and I guess it's still set up now that way, is that all the freshmen lived in dorms in the Harvard yard, and we ate in the freshman union, and you know, we ended up gravitating together at the kind of a floating black table, and we were able to, you know, to establish that. And for me and for many others, it was like a little refuge. You would go there and sit at this table, and you could, you didn't have to speak the King's English. You could use slang, or you could use Ebonics, and you'd find out what was happening with the black culture, you know, what was happening at home and that sort of thing. And it was sort of like there's a comedian today, I think his name is
Dion Cole.
Yeah, Dion Cole. He has this riff where he talks about how the difficulty for many blacks is that they have to manage their blackness, not to, you know, scare whites and that sort of thing. So this table represented a place where we could not have to manage our Negro-ness at Harvard, and we could sort of be ourselves at this little table. So I was very happy about that. But now, as things got going in the civil rights movement, we sort of started to really wonder about what we could do, what we could do to help our kids our age were getting, you know, beat up and arrested down in the South. So we decided that we would form a student organization. It was called the Association of African American at Harvard, but we called it Afro for short. And we ended up, you had to apply, you had to be approved by the Harvard faculty and the student group, I guess, student association. And we put in the charter that we wanted to set up a group that was for and about, it would be open to African and African American members of the Harvard University community. And we thought it would just sail by. We didn't have any particular agenda in mind. We just wanted to probably invite speakers, and the idea, if your club was associated with Harvard, you'd be able to, you could recruit and you could use Harvard facilities and buildings, and there was always money to invite guests. And we were really shocked when they said, no, you could not set up this organization, because they felt it was reverse discrimination. And we just hit the ceiling in the sense that Harvard has these, traditionally has had these clubs called final clubs or just eating clubs where all of these rich guys are, the Kennedys, the Rockefellers, the Roosevelts. They're in these clubs, which are eating clubs, and they don't, you know, they don't explicitly say they're, you know, they won't let blacks in, but they're no Jews, no new money, no Catholics, et cetera, et cetera. And they said to us, well, if you guys take that out of your charter, then you can do whatever you want to do. And we decided we didn't want to, you know, stoop to that level, and that was immoral, and that was not the righteous thing to do. So we ended up kind of objecting, and we ended up ultimately winning, and you know, which was really a great thing. Go ahead.
Right. So one of the things we decided we needed to know early on was whether this happened by chance, that you know, Harvard's going along for many years with 1, 2, 0, many years, no blacks at all in the freshman class, and then to go from like 4 or 5 to 18. Was that, did it just happen? You know, where there's just a lot of smart black kids graduating from high school, or was this an actual precursor to affirmative action? And little by little, it became clear that yes, Harvard went out to do it on purpose. There were a couple of influential liberal admissions officers who thought it was the right thing to do. And one of them was still living. His name was Fred Glib, and he was still living when we started the project and we got to interview him. And he said that, you know, that not everybody on the faculty and administration thought this was a very good idea, but he and a couple of other guys said, kind of just kept it quiet, but created affirmative action before affirmative action really was, before the phrase was used and before anybody was really doing it. And so we came to realize that they were out ahead of the curve a little bit, as Harvard likes to think it always is.
Yeah, I mean, but not really that. I mean, when you think about it, though, I mean, there were 18 of us, and I think at that time, the Negro or black population was 10 million people. So to be able to only find 18 guys out of 10 million blacks, I mean, that's a little bit, you know, ridiculous in a way. But I mean, it was good that they were ahead of the curve, and they did that. But yeah, as the civil rights movement, we just got more. I mean, the basic idea of the book, why we call it The Last Negroes at Harvard, is that we went in as Negroes, being called Negroes by the white world. And after our experiences at Harvard and our experience as to what happened throughout the nation, we came out of there as being Afro-Americans and or blacks. And I mean, much of that had to do with what we experienced on the campus. And for me, a lot of it had to do with when Malcolm X came, and we had this dinner with him, and he was just an inspiring, you know, wonderful guy. In many ways, in contrast to how he had been depicted in the press up to that time. So we came out of there really feeling black and really feeling like Afro-Americans. And part of the thing in the book is that we feel that we were a group that has not been really, whose story has not been told before. And we did have a role in the civil rights movement and in the, you know, I guess the arc of history towards justice and equality and all that. And when the bottom line in the book is that we basically feel that we, you know, it was an experiment and we carried the ball and we didn't drop it, to use a football analogy. and we maybe got Negroes or Blacks closer to the goal line. But here we are now with, in 2020, and it looks like they've changed the goal lines again. So, here we go again. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well,
Any
thank
questions?
you. Yeah,
Questions?
thank you very much, Ken. Yeah, this was a great, very powerful presentation from both of you, and I want to thank you. And I'm now going to call on Sunil, who has, for me, gotten onto another page, to ask the first question. And then I'll start reading from those that people have submitted, and please submit more. We've only gotten a few so far.
So first of all, congrats to you both on receiving our Distinguished Author Award. And we thank you very, very much for presenting to us tonight. It was a great discussion, so thank you very much.
Thank
We're
you.
so happy.
So Kent, when you look at Harvard now, has Harvard done enough for African Americans and other minorities?
When you say done enough, do you mean in terms of admissions and that sort of thing, or?
Admissions, acceptance on campus, supports of the groups, I mean, of course, when you formed your group, you had that difficulty, but when you look at the campus now, since you started this movement, are you happy where Harvard is now with respect to its?
I think, it's a hard question. I think I am, but the issue at Harvard now has to do with, it's almost in a way, not deja vu, but they're dealing with the Asian community, and there's a question of, how many Asian community people should be admitted. I think they've done a fairly well with Blacks and Negroes and all that, but I think what's good about Harvard is that they really believed in diversity. And when we came in 59, part of the diversity was racial, but also some of the diversity was geographic and where you lived and if you were poor or rich. And I think they've done a good job on that. I think they did a good job in picking out the 18 that they did pick out. They were very careful about picking us in the sense that they wanted people who they thought could survive. They sent some of us to like Andover, some of the New England prep schools before going to Harvard, before that, during the summer, because, when you get in there, especially when I went in there, it was like, landing on the moon. It's a whole different culture and everything. The food is, everything's different from where I came from. So I think Harvard did a good job.
But wouldn't you also say that it might be time for Harvard to look a little more closely at legacies and the children of big money and, we know about paying your way in. I think all universities need, this issue of who gets to go, who gets this scarce resource. And in my view, we are a rich enough country that we could provide excellent, cheap education for anybody who wanted to go to a good school. And the fact that we're sort of pulling back away from that just saddens me no end.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the other issue is that, at what percentage does a college become, not diverse? In other words, at what number are there too many Asian folks? Or the issue with us coming was that the scientific community and the, I guess, mathematical community felt that, Blacks had no contribution, or Negroes had no contribution to make to the college. And Glib and some of the other guys said, no, that's not the case. We're going to bring them in anyway.
And, I would just add, Sunil, with regard to this question is, we don't really know. We spent a week, or we spent days here and there. We talked to a lot of different Black students, white students.
Yeah.
I don't think we're that conversant with what it's like there now.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Well, there's another question from, she's asked more than one question, but Brenda R. Harris has asked, well, let me read it all. At the time, there were other universities that were racially unbalanced. Do you think that your experiences would have been as significant if you'd attended another school? Did you ever consider attending a historically Black university? And have you considered reaching out now for a documentary, considering the book's success? And are any of the remaining 18 supporters, any of the remaining 18 Black students, supporters of Trump? And if so, what are their reasons?
No, I don't think, no. None of us are supporters of Trump.
Not even close.
Not even
Not
close.
even-
So,
no.
And that's
Yeah.
an interesting question. You know, there are about, how many left now of us?
Let's see, 18, 12.
About 12 of us left, and 6 of us, we just started this sort of podcast, and we're calling it the Last Negroes at Harvard podcast, and it's sort of for fun. So on Saturdays at 1 o'clock, we get on the Zoom and start talking. And just this last Saturday, we were talking about the historical Black college experience, and how, when we think about it now, we realize that there were some things we missed. I mean, one of the guys, Freddie, on the podcast Saturday said, when you go to he had gone to I think Virginia Union, one of the colleges for a visit, and he said he was impressed by the camaraderie, the music, the games, and all that. And he said that when he went to this football game, he could tell that this was a game that came from his neighborhood. He grew up in Harlem and the Bronx and all that. And he said that, when we were going to football games and basketball games up at Harvard, we could tell that these were not from our neighborhood, And, the point is, though, we did miss that experience. And, I don't think, I think I would have probably still made the choice to go to Harvard. And at that time, Harvard was ahead. Yale had only a few Blacks, and I think Princeton was not letting any Blacks in at the time, Negroes in at the time.
yeah, and that's true. And Harvard also had Radcliffe. You didn't pay much attention to the women, but at that time there was, at least they had women in the classroom.
Right.
And as you said, there was only one woman in your class.
Right.
And
We struggled with that decision
yeah.
to begin, to include some more information about Radcliffe and the women, but it was just too much.
Yes, yeah, no, I can understand that.
Yeah.
By the time
It was
that I
lovely to
went,
meet Connie, Connie McDougall, the lone Black woman in her Radcliffe class. Yes.
yeah, and I think from your book, it seems as though the women in your classes were not as important to you as the people you had ate meals with, which were all men. Yeah, I mean, when I was there were only, I think, 5 or 6 Black women in the class of 69.
What year were you there?
Well, I was in the class of 69. And things had not changed a lot. Yeah.
Right.
There were more men, but larger percentage of men, but Black men, but not really Black women. Yeah. Anyway, I was. Let me see. I wanted to. Nan had asked a question, saying, "So the beginning of your relationship is entwined with the beginning of the book. What is your next project? Do you have a next project?"
I don't know. We darn near killed each other over that one. This one, no, that's not really true. But we did have some moments of, it was hard. It was very hard.
Yeah.
I mean, we both came out of having done writing, but me academic and him news. So there was this long sort of hard adjustment for each of us. I have an idea for a project that I can't sell him. I think his early years in news are an obvious next step. I mean, Black Journal, a fascinating experiment in public television. and his early days at the networks.
Yeah, sounds interesting to me.
Help me.
What do you think? Kent, you don't agree?
No, I mean, I think it'd be good. I mean, I'm not, yeah, I think it might be a good idea. I mean, I'm just sort of caught up in
Other things. Yeah.
other things right now and sort
Yeah.
of doing this daily news show.
Yes. Yeah, your daily
But
news.
after November 3rd, I'll be able to figure out what I'm going to do.
Oh, all right.
Leave the country
One way or
or,
the other. Yeah, yeah. Now let's see, Manhasset Library, whoever that is, asked questions. First, thanks both of you. And my question concerns your views regarding affirmative action. Do you believe it is advantageous for Black people?
do I believe it's advantageous?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, I do. And I think it's still necessary. I mean, I think we came in before there was an official,
Right, before it was called that.
before it was called affirmative action. But I mean, I think, I just think yeah, I think you need it. I mean, I think there's not an equal playing field at this point. I mean, even in my career at news, I spent, while I was milking cows, I would work in, I was a news director at a Fox station, Fox affiliate down in Binghamton, which was about an hour and a half drive away from the farm. And I would milk we had a show that went on at 10 o'clock. So I would stay on the farm till about 4 in the afternoon and drive down to Binghamton and do the news show. And as the news director, I was in charge of hiring people. And I found that subconsciously I was hiring, it was a station where young reporters came, the first market, and they would go to larger markets afterwards. But I found myself as a news director really, being swayed towards people that sort of spoke the King's English, that dressed in this preppy Ivy League dress. And, it was subconscious. And I realized that that's what happens in this society, in many different job situations. I mean, luckily at the station, the FCC was pretty strong then. You had to go down a list of different kinds of people that you interviewed, and you had to interview a certain number before you could make the hire.
That was their affirmative action.
That was their affirmative action, and it really was necessary to stop me, who would have hired somebody that subconsciously I was leaning toward. So anyway, the point is, I think it's still needed. I think it's still needed.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you have well, this was more of a comment, but somebody from your class. However, she was at Radcliffe. It's Bronnie Oxenberg.
I'm here. I wasn't at Radcliffe.
Hi,
I
Bronnie.
was at the Graduate School of Education.
Oh, hey.
1963 was the year that they said goodbye to Timothy Leary. That was a big.
Right.
So
But
many
I think
interesting
the-
things
You missed it
happened at Harvard in those 4 years. Holy crow.
Yeah, but I think that the fact that Uthan spoke was a big message, because it was like the theme of what's happening, of joining together and communities of color. And even though I didn't know you then, there were students from Africa there, because like David, a guy from Nigeria, was
Right.
another graduate student. But I think 1963 was a year where it was like the birthplace of communities coming together. So I admire what you did.
Yeah, thank you.
And I
Thank
think
you.
it was, as you said, there were African students, African.
Yeah,
nationals.
definitely.
And whoops, I think we ended.
Did we end?
What happened?
We're seeing a totally different.
Yeah, no, we didn't end. I will let me.
Okay.
Somebody named Peter Lesser is sharing their screen.
Oh,
I-
that's it. Yeah.
Should-
So anyway, well, the African nationals, I think it was several of the 18, for the first time thought, oh, gee, we are African, which is quite quite a thing to sort of come to understand as in your identity. And one of the Africans in Kent's class was very instrumental in setting up the organization.
Yeah. Actually, I have a question, and then Rhonda has one too. I'm just wondering if you think that the activism that was going on the Harvard campus, do you think you had any impact on, the larger civil rights movement? Do you think that there was the fact that Harvard was involved, that students at Harvard were getting active, getting to be activists like you and your friends?
I mean, I think maybe to an extent, but I mean, Harvard, it was really like living in a bubble to an extent. I mean, it was like your own little world, and we did interact and party and all that with the, Negroes, blacks in the Boston community. But I think we had maybe more of an impact much later. I mean, I know I did much later when I was at Black Journal and, doing TV work.
Yeah.
But I mean, but in other words, but one guy said that, I mean, if we had all flunked out, I mean, that would have been very bad. And while we were there, there was a lot of pressure. I mean, it was pressure from your family. You felt sometimes you had the weight of, the race on your shoulders. And you felt if you had flunked out, maybe they wouldn't let any more Negroes back in Harvard again. So, I mean, there was that kind of pressure as well.
Yeah. Well, Rhonda has a question for you. I'll read it out. All right. She wrote it very nicely. If you could give advice now to the young man that you were at Harvard, what advice would you give? What advice would you give to current Black students at Harvard?
Well, I would. I would tell them to listen to their elders. I mean, I would tell them to listen to what guys like us have to say. And secondly, I think we went back to the 55th reunion, and I think I would, in many ways, ask them to integrate more in the sense that the way it is now at Harvard, you can go through Harvard and almost have a historical Black college experience at Harvard. In other words, you could get through Harvard, and some of the guys in the classes were talking about that. You can get through Harvard without really dealing with any whites except for your teachers. There are all sorts of white clubs, even sort of dining clubs and all that, Black social associations, Black clubs. And I think when we went to a class, when we went to the class of 73, a class that had come 10 years after us, some of the people were lamenting that they had become too polarized and that they had gone through and not really mixed at all. So I would tell these guys to mix more now, because that's the world you're going to be going into. And, when I think about it, I should have done more of that myself too. I mean, I feel that I should have asked those questions about, what's it like to be white, but I really didn't, but I'd do it. If I did it again, I would.
Okay, well, we have a question from Judy E., who I think might be Judy Esterquest, unless it's somebody else, but it's an interesting journalism one. There have been a number of news articles about how Black journalists reporting on Ferguson and getting to know each other while reporting have seeded newsrooms today, and how those reporters have changed management perspectives. I think perspectives on entering the news prior to having any critical mass would be interesting. That's sort of what you did before there was a critical mass.
Right.
There even is one now, but there is a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think the news, I don't think it's progressed that much. I mean, when I was at NBC, I was like one of the only, few senior producers there, and I'm not sure if, news has gotten its act together quite really.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, depends on where you are, I think. Yeah.
Right, right.
So Guy Caldas, who has asked several questions, he said in his first one that he was in the class of 1959.
Really?
Yeah. So, and he asked for one thing that he briefly was asking, do you know how many Black students are at Harvard now? And then he asked this more complicated question. My roommates and I were jealous. This is in class of 59. My roommates and I were jealous of our extended shared phone roommate. When he went home on the weekends, he had a lot of parties where Black parents were hoping their attractive daughters would grab a Harvard man. Oh, I didn't really read this through. There's no question. But what I don't know. Go ahead. Can you comment?
About what?
I don't know. Yeah. I guess they had somebody who was
We lived in Roxbury.
Oh,
he lives in Roxbury. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
You'd come back with these pictures, and we were all jealous. They were beautiful women.
Yeah. Well, one of the men we interviewed remembered how what you were saying, that the Black aristocracy of the Boston area would almost troll Harvard, and have these little teas to try to hook up their daughters with. There was one woman, remember John told us about some woman he remembered who would have these teas, and John went to a couple, he was like, no, thank you, I'm not ready for marriage.
I mean, that was true about Radcliffe too. I mean, I think a lot of the Radcliffe women, were there to kind of find Harvard guys to marry.
No.
No?
You guys may have thought it was much harder. We were outnumbered 4-1.
That's true. Yeah.
However, that meant it was harder to get into Radcliffe. And
Right.
A lot of my Radcliffe friends and everybody is super smart and studious and determined, because there's no other way you could have gotten in.
Yeah.
And it wasn't to find a husband. Yeah. Anyway, here's somebody, and this might be interesting, maybe H. May Sprouse, who says that I was one of 2 Japanese Americans in the class of Radcliffe 1963. So May, you didn't ask a question, but I'd like to know what kind of experience you had, and maybe
I was in the
comment.
class of 63, and I actually knew Kent Wilson in Springfield, Illinois.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
Kent Wilson lives in Austria now.
Right, I know. I last saw him at the 25th reunion.
Oh, you did? Yeah, that's great.
But the other Japanese American was Mira Nakashima, and her father was very famous. So I didn't come from that kind of a background.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I went out early in the first couple weeks of freshman year. I guess I went out for coffee with Kent. And the next day I was chastised by the president of the dorm.
Oh, really?
Ooh,
wow.
Yeah. Dating that whole scene of, mixers and things was really interesting for these guys. They had all kinds of different odd experiences.
Right.
Yeah. Here's a question from Patricia K. asking, coming from New York City, what was your experience being Negro in Boston in 1959? In the late 70s, many of us Black law students from other US cities were surprised at the amount of discrimination we experienced at stores and restaurants in Cambridge and Boston.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, Boston was a real tough city back then. I mean, Cambridge was a little better, especially around, around Harvard, but still there was a lot of animosity, a lot of discrimination, and yeah, it was tough. It was very tough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one other question that I had was, what is your, since you were part of the, like the civil rights revolution, what's your opinion of what's happening now with Black Lives Matter? Do you think it's going to have a big impact in the long run, as the civil rights movement certainly had?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think they do, and I think the interesting thing is that they're doing it. They're making progress and doing it with two things. One, without any kind of real leader as such, which I think is good, which keeps it at a kind of a grassroots local level, which I think is good and ultimately more effective. And secondly, I think I think the number of whites that are involved now is quite significant, and I think it's going to go a long way. I mean, personally, I think Trump is going to lose, and I think it's going to, things are looking up. Really, I mean, I think that, I always feel that we've sort of been in a circle. We started our lives with Jim Crow and discrimination, and here we are at, close to the end of our lives, and we're just sort of experiencing it again. And, hopefully things will change.
He's a very optimistic man.
Well, I'm optimistic, yeah. I mean, but, I don't play golf or anything, but I figured at this age, not that we'd have a totally non-racial society, but I thought things would definitely be further along than they are now. But hopefully that'll change.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask one other, maybe this is a frivolous question, but I think that your title is just brilliant, because it it really is intriguing, and it makes people want to read the book. And I was wondering how you came up with that title. Whose idea was it?
Well, I think it was.
It really was both of us, wasn't it?
Yeah, we traveled to we have a little apartment down in Chiapas, Mexico, down at a town called San Cristobal de las Casas. It's about 3,013 miles from where we are now. We used to drive it. We would do 3 days in the States and then 2 days in Mexico. And that's where we wrote a lot of the book. I mean, not physically wrote it, but talked about it. And that's where the idea came up.
But Kent mentioned earlier, we started with this title of Harvard's Black 17. And it seemed like whatever, that was going to be the title. And then as we began doing more and more research, particularly some of the historical stuff, of course, the word Negro is used over and over and over. And there was this moment when we thought, hey, wait a minute. If we use the word Black in the title, that's an anachronism. That doesn't really capture. And I don't know, we were definitely in the car, and somehow we came up with this. We weren't the first, of course. What were we? Well, the last. And just, I don't know, there was these couple of moments when we kind of looked at each other like, oh my God, we got it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, I think that, I don't see any other real questions here. There are a few comments.
Can I just make one comment?
Yes.
Because we started this as a video project, if you go to the book website, which is the Last Negroes at Harvard.com, I guess, we put a bunch of the video up. So if you're interested in seeing the real guys really talking and telling some of these stories, go there and click on Meet the Guys. I think it's called Meet the Guys.
Yes.
And you can, hear their own words.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And of course, that's how people can also be directed to a place where they can buy your book.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
The library has been kind enough to, what do they have, 5? Melissa, you were saying you have 5 copies, right?
Yeah, I believe they purchased, I'm sorry, it looked like I glitched for a second. I believe they purchased about 5, and I think we also have additional copies on digital, but we definitely have 5 physical copies in the building.
Great, great.
But better for them. You can, also buy the book yourself. So, well, I want to thank everybody. And Rhonda, would you like to join me with a few last words, or you have to unmute yourself first? Yeah.
I just, yeah, I did it. I just want to thank again Kent and Jeanne. I think this was a really a fascinating discussion and a wonderful book. And I'm actually going to now go look at those videos, because I don't think I realized that you could actually see some of people. And I really want to thank you. And I thank Eileen and the Bryant Library and Nan and Sunil. And I think it was wonderful. And this was indeed the greatest participation that we've had for an author visit. And I think that's a testament to you and your book.
Great,
Well,
great.
it was a pleasure. Just
Thank you.
lovely, lovely evening. And thanks.
Thank you.
Glad you enjoyed it. And Nan, did you want to say goodbye also?
Yes, thank you. So I opened and I'll close, and I was riveted to your entire presentation. And I too also want to look at the videos, and it gives me a deeper appreciation of the Harvard experience at a different time. So I came after you as a woman of color coming into Harvard. So it's good to see the different experiences of different types of students as we go through the institution. So thank you very much. It was amazing. And hope we continue our relationship. Yes.
Hi, Sela. Hi, guys.
Sala.
Thank you.
Thank you for turning
You're
it up.
welcome. You're welcome. It's great meeting you. I do have a question, my last question. Kent, you said that you're not, when you left Harvard, you didn't look back, you didn't join any organization. I'm inviting you at this very moment to join our club, the Harvard Club of Long Island.
Honorary member.
Oh, great. All right, excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. We'll certainly get all the information out to you. And thank you so much for doing this.
Okay, thank you.
You have to come to one of our meetings, though, okay?
Okay, we'll do. Definitely.
But the meetings
We
are
have a
being
great
held
deal of activities.
online now. Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
okay,
Well,
thank
whenever
you.
we get back
All right.
in person.
All right, bye-bye.
So it was great meeting both of you.
Thank
Okay, nice
you.
to meet you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.